Welcome back, beautiful people. Today we will be building the biggest ecosystem today. The first thing I did was seal this tank with liquid rubber. It actually took me about 8+ coats to do this, and I did this over the course of 8 to 9 days, so it took a long time to seal it. This is because you can't do it every 6 hours, or I couldn't do it every 6 hours when you work full time. So I had to wait every single day when I came home from work, spend time with the family, and then on a night I'll go out and spend an hour or two putting another coat on there. Sadly, the glass wasn't flush, but what I did, I put foam boards on the side so essentially keep those edges in so nothing can escape. These vents towards the back, I actually cut micron mesh or steel mesh to fit each corner and silicone sealed it in. This worked a dream. However, as soon as I put the drill hole in for the back of the lights or the wires, this made that completely irrelevant. So I decided I would not do it that way and just put the micron steel mesh towards the very back of the vivarium. The next thing was to cut those foam boards for the waterfall area. If you haven't seen me do this before, make sure you check some of my other build videos. I do it on every single one of them, and there's quite a lot of paludarium, vivarium, those types of builds where I actually use this system. I then water tested the tank. The reason I did that is just to see or to make sure that it didn't leak before I started to proceed with the rest of the scape, because it would have been almost impossible to do that further down the line. All I then did next was on the intake part of that filter box, I made a small lid and also fitted some mesh vents to the box itself, and this way water can get in, and also at the same time it prevents more debris getting into the filter section. At this point as well, there was a small gap between each panel of the glass, which small things like morning geckos and nulls could potentially get out of. I do have a solution and I fixed it further down the line, which I will show you. The following day, the water test was done and it completely held water. This is also a really good sign, because I mean, if it doesn't hold water, then I can't do it. You know, that's the end of it really, isn't it? End of conversation. The tank needs some modifications. The next thing I did with those foam mats is I essentially cut out that pool area from the waterfall. I looked at the scape and decided what I wanted to do with it. In the areas where the foam block wasn't, I filled it with a drainage layer and then also added the mesh between those layers. The mesh will be used within that water area, and this is a really good way to stop the water from wicking up into the soil. But even if it does, it's 120 centimeters tall, so you're only talking a couple of inches of water which will actually physically wick up into the plants, but I can diversify the plant selection to those areas. The hardscape itself though was really coming along. I decided to add the waterfall feature quite early on because I wanted to see how it looked. I also at the same time needed to go out and buy another couple of those rocks from the shop, which was really annoying because I had those laying around, and only in this hobby we spend money on rocks and twigs. My bearded dragon was also being very needy and needed some attention, so I stopped doing everything what I was doing for the time being to get some handling time in and some feeding time. And if you didn't know, his name is Apollo. All of you in the community voted for his name and Apollo came out as #1. Also, please let me know if you would like a full video on this. So essentially I reduced everything down to about 10 to 15 minutes. However, I do have about a 2.5–3 hour video of all of the footage of me actually building this. So let me know in the comments if that's something you would like to see. Now I tried to reduce it to hopefully keep you beautiful people entertained as long as possible, because I do know that this process or this stage can be very boring for people. So if there is some of you who would like a more detailed sort of video on how I build everything, then let me know, because all of these time lapses, even though they're already time lapses, they're all sped up by 5 times the speed. So just let me know exactly what you want from the channel. This is the hardscape set, and this is exactly how those wires looked right through those vent holes. These mesh membrane sort of steel cutouts, they go towards the very back of that vivarium. I ended up cutting the wire holes slightly bigger. I then just silicone seal those in, and that's pretty much set. I decided to show you the holes in the vents anyway. Once I finished with that, I then added detail to that canopy area. It was easier for me to do the bottom section, plus I was running out of materials. The hobby is actually really expensive buying the materials, so this is why I spend so long in between builds, because it's sadly stupidly expensive, you know, and I wouldn't have been able to do this today if I didn't buy this vivarium from Facebook Marketplace, and at the same time have that method with that rubber liquid. And to seal this, it reduced the costs drastically. But those few members who are currently paying $1.99 to the channel, you do actually contribute a lot more to me than you will ever know. It's very messy, but this is how the vent looks towards the back, because there's no wires going out of there. The same thing will happen apart from the wires out the other ones, but you can't see it, so why worry about the mess on it? The next thing was to add more detail towards the actual waterfall area, the front, the sides, everything. I spent many hours gluing individual twigs, branches, logs, spiderwood, different materials all around the whole scape, and these were things that I'd salvaged from what I'd had already within my whole collection of materials, and at the same time these are things that I went out and bought. Quite a few of you have also been mentioning to me that you want to know exactly how something like this would cost. If this is something that you're interested in, then just let me know in the comments. Obviously, this is what I'm here for, to explain all the smaller details in regards to a build like this. So if this is something you really want to know, then just let me know in the comments. I'll do a separate video breaking every individual cost down on all of my builds. Plus, I always have so many people asking me that exact question. How much does it cost? Finer hardscape details are in. I decided to fill that water section up again, and sadly for me, the waterfall didn't actually work straight away. I turned the waterfall on and absolutely nothing happened. I decided to also test that fogger that I just bought, or the new mister, and the mister, it didn't work. So at this point, I was sort of, nothing worked, the filter didn't work, the mister didn't work. I then had to cut through the top section of that waterfall, which is why I'm showing this rock. I cut into it, put the foam in there and put a new filter in the top area, which this way I can still do maintenance, but it's just a little bit more chewy than it would have been if it was in that little filter section where it had an opening lid. It was obviously really frustrating, but you do come across these problems along the journey. It was annoying because I couldn't then incorporate that wire within the background. It was in full view, so I had to then sort of hide it within the scape and the plant itself. But again, these things happen, and hopefully this way you guys can learn from my mistakes, and in the future you won't run into the same problems. The new filter was working very well, almost too well, so I decided to do a few amendments. I went to the plant shop anyway, also bought some crickets for my bearded dragon, bought some silicone, bought some plants, bought a few more logs. Life was great. I also visited a local park near me with my family. Whilst we were there, I gathered a few different types of mosses and also some branches or twigs with lichen on them. And this is where the ecosystem really starts to come to life. Once you start putting plants in there, some springtails, a cleanup crew, everything else, it all really does start to come together, and it's definitely the most fun part of the whole process. And by that I just mean the building process. The actual development is definitely the best part. The next thing I added in was some tiger worms. These are a really good starter culture for a tank like this. If you don't have worms in your ecosystems or your bioactive terrariums, then I would heavily suggest adding some tiger worms. Not only do they eat mold, decay, and different things that are rotting within the soil, they also help aerate your plants as well, and they work really good when they poop, because their poop is the best fertilizer you can get for your plants. I then decided to add a colony of different cubaris. So the first was a blonde red edge, murina, and panda kings. The following day, this is starting to look really nice. I was letting it set overnight, testing different temperatures with the new plants in and everything else, and I've established it's definitely a little bit too hot towards the top canopy area. This is because I've got 3 floodlights in there alongside a UVB bulb which covers 1/3 of the actual tank itself. I did decide to go through the costs today on how much something like this would actually put you back. The reason I wanted to do this one in particular is because it is on a much larger scale than usual. So I wanted to show you how you can save on costs in the meantime. Like this Viv, for example, I bought it from Facebook Marketplace for £100. And at the same time, anything of this size in glass or the Exoteric Vegan Terra style of tank, you're looking closer to that £1,000 mark. I bought 2 buckets of liquid rubber, which were 5 litre tubs, so 10 litres in total, and that was £100. So £200 for the Viv and to seal it. The only thing that it cost me was a lot more time in actually sealing the vivarium. Plus for me, it's the first time using liquid rubber, and I am worried about the integrity of the actual vivarium itself. Now, I do know that a lot of people have used this, and quite a lot as well, but I still have that worry in the back of my mind that I didn't seal it quite right, or I might have missed certain spots more than others, and that's what I'm worried about most. But finally the waterfall's on, and I'm going to be adding a little bit more detail towards the foreground and also the canopy areas. I was happy with it so far, but there's definitely a lot of things I could have been doing to this to make it look even better. I then went out and got some river moss, which I collected from my father's pond, and within that river moss was a whole different plethora of additional inhabitants. I then added a good colony of Armadillidium gestroi. This was around 15 strong I put in there. These are just from one of my breeder tubs that I have in the room. Once I'd added those, I also then added some native millipedes. These are in a soil culture that I currently have. I added bumblebee millipedes as well, dwarf white isopods, even more springtails and worm castings, and also some armadillidium, zebra, maculatum, yellow. And once I'd done that, this was almost finished for now. Please do vote what you think I should be adding in here next. You beautiful people also voted on the morning geckos and the crab combo, so I'll leave a cinematic to run right now before I add additional things in here after the cinematic. Four days later, you can see all of the plants are really starting to look towards those lights as well. They're sort of setting themselves in. I am expected for a couple of them to die off, but that is usual within a tank like this, especially with such a varied selection. But I also felt like something was missing. So a few days later, when I had the opportunity, I went and collected some more moss and different branches and twigs. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to remind you to vote in the comment section to what we should be keeping in here. I am really excited to see how this tank develops, and I hope you beautiful people also are at the same time. We also need to name the vivarium itself. What should we name it? Once I've got the best votes for what animals and also the name of the viv, I'll put them in the community tab. As always, we'll vote to see what we think's best. And if you have liked the video today, hitting that like button goes a million miles for the channel, more than you'll ever know. Subscribe if you want to see more updates on this ecosystem and more ecosystems and builds in the future. But as always from me, peace and love, I'm out.